Hey travelers, it's Nick the Traveler, and I'm here on a beautiful Sunday morning on my porch enjoying what the day has brought so far and hopefully not sweating out too much this afternoon. I wanted to talk today a little bit about one of my favorite trips, or the trip that kind of put me over the edge with the love of travel. And it happened in 2002. My friend Sarah was going to New Zealand. She had worked up a work visa, and I was looking at a program similar to hers, or actually the same program, called BUNAC, and I decided, what the hell, I might as well just do it. And so I decided I was going to save my money, and I've been a good saver in college, and moved to Australia. So in the fall of 2002, I got on a plane, got on a long flight to Sydney, and started my journey. My journey started on Air New Zealand. I flew on Air New Zealand down to Auckland and then connected into Sydney, Australia. When I got to Sydney that first day, I was scared out of my mind. I was in a different place. I had just left autumn, and there were palm trees, and the sun was shining, and it was warm, and it was a little bit different than anything I'd ever expected before, because I come from the Midwest where we have the four seasons. Anyway, so I get to Sydney, and I'm a part of this program called BUNAC, and I knew I had to go to an orientation in a couple days. So I decided, hey, what the heck, it's 10 o'clock in the morning, it's time to go take a look at Sydney. So I started to walk around the city. I found my hostel. It was easy to get to. It was right on Pitt Street, 400 Pitt Street in Sydney, and I started to walk around the city. On my first day, my goal was to find the major things. I didn't really have a good map. Well, I had one in Lonely Planet, but I didn't know which way was north, south, east, or west, so I wasn't exactly sure where I was. So I got to walking, and I was exhausted after that long flight, and walked all around the city. It was gorgeous. And finally, after about 2 hours or so, I finally ended up in the famous CBD area of Sydney. This is where you have things like the famous rocks, the Harbour Bridge, and also the Sydney Opera House, which everyone, of course, knows. It was fantastic. You know, I was finally seeing what was going on. It was a beautiful city, gorgeous. So then a few days later, you know, I just started to get used to my surroundings, where I was at, started to look for a job and things like that. Finally found how to get to the beaches. They were gorgeous, some of the best beaches I've ever seen. Granted, I'm from the Midwest, I haven't seen a ton of beaches, but they were gorgeous. There were people everywhere. People really enjoy the outdoors there and really get out and do things. So after a few months, it was time to start my travels, because being an American, my visa was a little bit shorter than most, or shorter than the Canadians in English and such. It's top in Canberra, which is the nation's capital, which is probably one of the weirdest cities I've ever been to in my life. There are great monuments and the city structure, so if you ever get a chance, really look up the city structure, because the city structure is very interesting how they set it up. After Canberra, it was time to go to Melbourne. Greg was planning to stay there after we were doing some traveling, and so we got down to Melbourne and had a great time. Saw a lot, did a lot of walking, a lot of hanging out. One of the funniest stories was there was a Welsh traveler there, and one night I woke up and his fake leg was on my face. It fell off the bed. Hilarious. I didn't even know I had a fake leg. Another story for another time. So then, spent some time in Melbourne, went over to Adelaide, which I think is one of the most gorgeous places I've ever been. People think I'm weird, people think Adelaide's not the greatest place in the world, but I really enjoyed it. It was a smaller city, a little bit more homey. It was the first major city or major place in Australia that wasn't some kind of jail or that type of situation, so there wasn't that kind of spirit about it. It also has a great wine country, and was able to go on a couple of wine tours and get wasted before noon. After that, Greg and I took the train across the Nullarbor Plain all the way to Perth. It was a 3-day journey with just a couple of spots. We stopped in one place called Cook, which has the longest stretch of straight railway in the world. Crazy hot. The train was totally uncomfortable. We got the cheap backpacker seats, which are just seats like I'm sitting in. Imagine doing that for 3 days. Then you go and have food, and the food's frozen and not very good on the train. You know, sometimes it would be worth having the the enclosed first class cabin or having a sleeper cabin. So we got to Perth. Loved Perth. It was such a great place. It's the most isolated city in the world. It's further than any capital anywhere. It's great. Perth just has an interesting spirit about it. It's gorgeous. One of my favorite places was the Swanbourne Beach. Also over there we went over to Rottnest Island, which has these small quokka type animals. They're marsupials, like big marsupial rats is what they look like. They're ugly, but they're everywhere in this island, and this is kind of the only island that has it. There's also a strange history in Rottnest Island. They had a lot of death penalty cases go through there, I guess, and there was some slave trade, and you can read about kind of the history of Rottnest Island, but it's gorgeous. There's snorkeling. Greg saw a shark. Great snorkeling. At this time we had good tans because it was the summer and it was just fantastic. So then I decided to fly back to Adelaide, so I was going to start my journey up the center. So Greg ended up kind of following behind me after Perth. I think he actually stayed a couple extra days maybe, and went a different route to do some traveling. And I went up the center. I started out taking a bus up to Alice Springs, which Alice Springs is a scary place. It's hot. There's a lot of issues with drug use, alcohol abuse and such, and it's not the best place to be, and I didn't feel very comfortable when I was there. So while I was there, I took the Adventure Australia, I think it was, I can't remember the name of the place, and we went and saw Uluru, the Kata Tjuta, and did a really, really great camping trip. We were outside. Now, I'm from Iowa. We have great nights where you can see stars forever because we don't have a lot of lights. But this is something like I've never seen before. I've never seen so many bright stars, so many scorpions, so many animals, kangaroo, wild horses, wild camels. You never expect to see what you're going to see. And we were staying in these swags, which are kind of roll-away, kind of sleeping bags, I guess you could say. And they were great. The food was great. The people were all young. We had a wild party one night that I don't want to talk about on camera, but it was one of the wildest parties I've ever had in my life. After we went to Alice, then I went to Tennant Creek, which is the scariest place I've ever been to in my life. I felt very threatened, and we don't want to talk about that. So then I took a 36-hour bus ride from Tennant Creek all the way over to the East Coast. I made it up to Townsville and Cairns. In Cairns, I learned how to dive, went on a great dive tour, then made my way down the coast, went to the Whitsunday Islands, which has some of those beautiful places ever. Finally, it was time for the Fraser Island, which I love Fraser Island because you have every different kind of ecosystem in there. You have beaches, you have deserts, you have rainforests, you have old growth forests, all in this really long sand island. Everything's sand. We had this massive car to go through. Such another great time, another great group. I had this German tour guide who was great. Then I made my way further south down to Brisbane, which Brisbane was great. Got to go see Bruce Springsteen in concert, met a lot of cool people from his tour, got to meet him and a bunch of other things. From there, I went further down the coast, and I was getting really tired. I was partying a lot at this time, and I made it, and I stayed with my friend Gary, who had rented a place in Byron Bay, which I wish I would have had more time in Byron Bay and would have been feeling better, but I was wiped out. I had so much sun. I had been drinking too much and having a great time. But this experience really defined who I am, really changed a bunch of things in my life, and a bunch of things for the better. I can't wait to make it back to Australia at some point. It's a great country. It's not as far as you think. The flight isn't as bad as people think, and it is a little expensive, but it's so worth the money once you get to do that. So, my advice to you, get out there, see faraway places like Australia, New Zealand, and all the other parts of Australasia, and have a great time traveling.